Hello everyone. So, as you can imagine, I'm not really here. This is just a recording. I cannot be here for a number of reasons, but I left this video which you will be able to use as guidance for this lesson. So, what are we doing today? Today we're talking about King Aethelred the Unready. Our learning objective, as you can see on the top of the slide, is to understand why King Aethelred was known as the Unready. Spoiler, it's not what you think it means. Now, before we start, I would like you to take some time to answer these three questions in your books in full sentences. First, what were those priests who spread Christianity among the barbarians called? Second, what were the three highest layers of Anglo-Saxon society? And third, how did the church help the kings of Anglo-Saxon England? They received protection from the king, protection and a lot of money. What did they give them in exchange? And then answer this true or false question. The Fourth Crusade took place in 1099. Roman auxiliary soldiers became citizens after serving for 25 years in the army. The Romans never fought each other, only other barbarians. And the fall of Rome was caused exclusively by the barbarian invasions. Now, you are going to pause this video, pause this recording, take some time, answer the question, and then when you're ready, come back here and check the answers. Okay, you can pause now. And if everything has gone as it should, you would have answered all the questions, so let's check. Now, the priests who spread Christianity among the barbarians were called missionaries. They were sent on a mission to convert the barbarians to Christianity. The three highest layers of Anglo-Saxon society were the kings on top, then you got the earls, who were the big nobility, the important nobles in the Anglo-Saxon realms, and then the thanes, the upper class but not as important as the earls. Now, the church helped the kings in Anglo-Saxon England by making them look good in exchange for protection. Remember, we mentioned the case of King Aethelred the Great, who was certainly a very competent ruler, but who was generally remembered as a heroic figure, mostly because of the histories and biographies that were written about him by bishops who benefited from his patronage, from the money and support he provided to the church. Now let's look at the true or false. Now, the Fourth Crusade was in 1099. False. It happened in 1204 in the city of Constantinople. Remember all that complicated story we looked at. Second, Roman auxiliary soldiers became citizens after 25 years in the army. True. There were two main branches in the early Imperial Roman army, so first to early 3rd century AD, the legionaries, who were the Roman citizens, who didn't really earn citizenship, they were already, and then the auxiliaries, who came from the people subject to Rome, so from Syria, from Germany, what are the current Netherlands, Britain, and so on. And if they served well for 25 years, they would become Roman citizens with all the benefits and privileges of their status. Now, the Romans never fought each other, only against barbarians. This is obviously false. The Romans had this very damaging habit of constantly getting into civil wars with one another. This was due to a number of reasons, not least the fact that there was no clear law of succession. It wasn't really clear after the death of one emperor who would become the next emperor. So everybody who had enough guts and enough soldiers behind him would say, I am the new emperor, gather his mates and march towards Rome to be crowned by the Senate. A lot of people tended to do this at the same time, so civil war. Finally, the fall of Rome was caused exclusively by the barbarian invasions. False. We looked at a multiplicity of intertwined factors when looking at the fall of Rome. For example, we looked at climate change brought by a relatively short period of global cooling. We looked at certain natural disasters like the eruption of a volcano in, I think it was Indonesia, which spread ash all over the sky, dampening the sunlight and making agriculture less profitable. Then we looked at epidemics, economic changes, and a lot of factors. The fall of Rome is one of the most complicated things ever happened in human history. But we're not here to talk about the fall of Rome. We're here to talk about Anglo-Saxon England, and in particular about the reign of King Aethelred the Unready, trying to understand why was he called the Unready. What are we doing is we are looking at a small chronology timeline of events. We're not looking at the opinion of historians, forgot to delete that. We are first looking at the timeline of events in the 10th and early 11th century. Then we're trying to I'm trying to give you a small narrative of what was going on during the kingdom of Aethelred, what were his problems and so on. And then we're going to answer the final question. So, there we go. Now, timeline in England between the 10th and the 11th centuries. So in 991, an Anglo-Saxon army was defeated by a Danish Viking force at the Battle of Maldon in Essex. The Vikings paid 10,000 marks of silver in Danegeld. We will meet the word Danegeld again later on in this lesson. It literally means Danish gold. It was the kind of tribute paid to the Viking invaders so that they would go away. Now, use your big brains to start thinking about this. What could possibly, if we pay someone who threatens to attack us, if we pay them to go away because we are not good enough at defending ourselves, what would happen? Will they just be happy with the money they received, or will they come back for more? Spoiler, they come back for more. In fact, in 194, Aethelred met another Viking army, and this time he paid twice the price, 22,000 pounds of silver in Danegeld. In the year 1002, tired of paying all this gold to the Danes and misguided for some reason, Aethelred ordered a massacre of the Danes in England. And when we say a massacre of the Danes in England, we mean all of the Danes were supposed to be killed. As we will see later on in this lesson, it wasn't really carried out that efficiently, but it happened. And we have proof of it. Archaeologists have unearthed... Oh, destroyed my table lamp. Have unearthed mass graves with hundreds of bodies of Danish people who were probably massacred in 1002. Moving on, in 1013, a full-scale invasion by the Danish king Svein Forkbeard, I cannot think of a more Viking name, forces King Aethelred to flee to Normandy. He simply was not able to defend the country, and as we will see, many earls, many of his bigger nobles, sided on the side of the Vikings. Between 1014 and 1016, Aethelred gathered an army somehow and led it again in England to fight against Svein. Swine means pig. However, he died in 1016, and also Svein died in 1016. And the heir to the Kingdom of England was Knut, the son of Svein. Knut eventually became King of England, the first proper Viking king of a unified England in the year 1017, being part of an empire which included Denmark and Norway as well. Now, in this lesson we are going to focus only on Aethelred. In the next lesson we are going to look at Knut. In 1035 he died, leading to a 7-year period of turmoil and rivalry, as it happens very often. King dies, nobles are not sure who's going to be in charge, they start fighting one another. In the end, Edward the Confessor, I think it was the Anglo-Saxon Earl of Wessex, yes, became king in 1042 until 1066. And 1066 is another very fateful date, which we're going to look at in the next weeks. Moving on. What we've seen in the previous lessons. Now, by the year 1000, England under Aethelred was, as we've seen before, a pretty formidable country. It was very well managed, it was quite wealthy. We have looked at its strength in the last lesson, if you remember. We looked at identity, unity, and loyalty to a single ruler. We have looked at the role of the church, which glorified the kings and provided a lot of community support. We have looked finally at the system of government, the shires divided into hundreds, the writs used as a way to hand out orders to the individual sheriffs, the individual sheriffs of the territory. So, with all this in mind, how did it all come crumbling down? If Anglo-Saxon England was such a strong and stable state, how did it fail to repel the Vikings? So, did Ethelred's England have any problem? As we said, yes, the Vikings. The Vikings were back. We didn't talk too much about it, but the Danes, the Vikings, so raiders from Norway and from Denmark, were a huge problem for the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. They seem to have stopped around the year 100, but by the end of the 10th century, around 990, they came back with a vengeance. Raids began again, as we said, in 990. And so, Aethelred was replaced by the Danish king Knut in the year 1016. How could this happen? That's today's question, which is also the question of why do we call King Aethelred the Unready the Unready? So, what are we doing today? Well, Aethelred dies and he is replaced by Knut. So we're going to read a text, which would be in the handout, but it's going to be in this presentation, about King Aethelred and why he became known as the Unready. We're going to read each paragraph and then we are going to summarize it. Again, we need to learn how to summarize it because it means squeezing the knowledge juice out of a text. It's one of the most important skills you can have in your life. Reading something and understanding what do they want to tell me and why. Okay? We will look at the why people want to tell us certain things in a later series of lessons. Today we're focusing on squeezing the knowledge juice, trying to understand what is the main argument behind a piece of text. So let's go back here. What I'm doing is I'm reading here. I'm going to highlight certain parts, if I can. Oh, sorry. There we go. I'm going to highlight certain parts and then I'm going to give you some time to do a summary. So, let's start reading. In the year 991, a large Viking army defeated the Saxons at the Battle of Maldon. Facing overwhelming defeat, the young King Aethelred consulted the Witan, remember the Witan, the assembly of the earls, and they did what previous rulers had always done. They paid off the Vikings with the Danegeld. So let's look at young King Aethelred here, and then let's underline the essential action. He paid off the Vikings with the Danegeld, literally Danish gold, a payment to avoid being attacked. Not surprisingly, as you can imagine, the Vikings soon returned for more. In 994, they were paid 22,000 pounds of silver. And so it went on. The attacks continued year by year, each more damaging and expensive than the one before. So, how do we go on and summarize this? We can say, I would like you, now I'm writing this for you, but I would like you to do it by yourselves for the next paragraphs. I will just highlight the major points and I will give you the task of putting them together into a coherent paragraph. So we can say, in 991, the Vikings defeated an English army at Maldon. King Aethelred paid them off with the Danegeld. Okay, so those are the thing. First, we have looked at the, in a way, inciting incident, at the thing that triggered the fall of Aethelred, and then the Battle of Maldon. Then we looked at the thing that I highlighted there, which is who is doing what and what he's doing. So, who is at the center of the action? Young King Aethelred. What is he doing? He's paying off the Vikings with the Danegeld. Now, the next thing that I highlighted is the consequences of this action. Not surprisingly, the Vikings returned for more. How can we rephrase it? We can say the Vikings soon return. No, let's change this. This made the Vikings hungry for more. Okay, bit of a flair. For more, and the attacks continued. Okay, so we have, in just a few words, we have summarized this entire paragraph. In 991, the Vikings defeated an English army at Maldon. King Aethelred paid them off with the Danegeld. This made the Vikings hungry for more, and the attacks continued. First paragraph. Let's move on to the second paragraph. Let me get the highlighter. There we go. I'm also summarizing this one for you. There are a few. I'm doing this to make it easier for you to understand what we're actually doing. We are trying to squeeze the knowledge juice out of each paragraph. Now, because he was unable to defeat the Vikings, Aethelred began to lose support of the Earls. So, we got the main point: Aethelred began to lose support of the Earls, and the reason why it happens. There are two important parts of what's going on, especially the Earls from outside Wessex, which was his area. To be fair to Aethelred, the Viking forces were now much larger and better organized than they had ever been. Instead of collections of warrior bands, the Vikings were now led by one powerful and very effective ruler, Svein Forkbeard. He had made himself king of Denmark and also controlled much of Norway. So, think about it for 1 second. How would you squeeze the knowledge juice from this? How would you summarize this? Now, so we can say cause, effect, and why it was understandable. Those are the main thing. So we can say due to his defeat at Maldon, Aethelred, it doesn't say Maldon in here, but it is connected to the previous one. We're talking about the same thing. So due to his defeat at Maldon, Aethelred lost the support of his earls. We can also say that the defeat was caused by the fact that the Vikings, ruled by Svein Forkbeard. Generally, I would avoid adding too many characters in this summary, but Svein Forkbeard is probably the most important in this narrative of the history of Aethelred, so we need to put him there. The defeat was caused by the fact that the Vikings, ruled by Svein Forkbeard, were now much better organized than before. Okay, again, let's not ruled by King Svein Forkbeard, because he was a king. Again, due to his defeat at Maldon, Aethelred lost the support of the Earls, and here we are seeing the first sentence. It is pretty much the same because it's already very much a summary. This defeat was caused by the fact that the Vikings, ruled by King Svein, were now much better organized than before. Let's now move on to the, pause the video if you want to copy this down, and then resume it when you are ready to move on. So, moving on to the third paragraph. Let's take the highlighter again. There we go. Aethelred also made some bad decisions. I think we need to highlight this whole sentence because it sounds like it's going to be the key to understand the rest. Now, historian John Blair believes that he made bad choices about the earls he appointed and trusted the wrong people. So again, very important point. Also made bad decision, and your mind should go to such as what? Such as the fact that he made bad choices about his earls and he trusted the wrong people. Another bad decision was in 1002, when he sent out an order to kill all the Danes living among the English. And you can imagine this is another big example of a very, very wrong decision made by King Aethelred. Now, many innocent Danes were murdered. This is sort of implied, this thing is sort of implied in the previous sentence, but it gives us an idea of the tragedy of it all, of the gravity of it all. However, many earls thought the massacre was a bad idea and simply refused to do it, because they thought it would lead to Viking revenge attacks. Again, so here we got, and you don't need to copy, actually I'm not writing it, but I am telling you, so we got 3 main sentences to write in this summary. The first one should be Aethelred made some bad decisions. So actually let's write it. Aethelred made some bad decisions. So for example, what did he do? He made bad choices about the earls he appointed and trusted the wrong people. Try to squeeze the juice. Try to summarize it. For example, he trusted the wrong people. See? This is double highlighted. I'm highlighting within the highlight. We are trying to progressively reduce what we write. Also, in 1002, what did he do? He sent out an order to kill all the Danes, and this would have tragic consequences. According to his subject, this would lead to what? And then we look back at the text, it would lead to Viking revenge attacks. So, you should have copied the first two, right? Now, what I would like you to do is complete this text. So, say Aethelred made some bad decisions. For example, he trusted the wrong people. Also in 1002, he sent out an order to kill all the Danes. According to this subject, this will lead to Viking revenge attacks. Bam! Summary. You can pause now and finish it, and then resume the video again when you've finished. Moving on. Let's move on to this other paragraph here. Let's get the highlighter again. Now, one of England's strengths had been its unity, but now it was becoming disunited. Do you see that we are highlighting most of the initial sentences? Because the initial sentences here tell us what the paragraph is going to be about. They are like, this is what I'm going to talk about, and then here are the details. So yes, this is by itself a good way of reading the paragraph. One of England's strengths had been its unity, but now it was becoming disunited. This weakened England. Many earls lost faith in Aethelred. For example, in 1007 there was a drive to build warships, and 100 were built by 1009. This could have helped defend England from the Vikings, but a dispute arose among the fleet commanders and the fleet was disbanded without being used. Now, what I think, this paragraph is slightly different because it's mostly a single example. I think we can skip this single example. It's important and it's interesting, the fact that in 1007 there was this huge fleet that was built in order to protect England from the Vikings, but then they started squabbling with each other, and so the fleet was never used, and the Vikings invaded and kicked the legitimate king away from the throne. So it's important, but we can avoid it because we are trying to, again, squeeze the knowledge juice from this paragraph. We can say one of England's strengths was, what was it? In this case, England had many strengths at the time, and we looked at them in the previous lesson, but in this case, he's talking about unity, the idea that we all belong to the same community. And however, now the country was becoming what? It was becoming disunited. Many earls, many earls, what did they do? They lost faith in Aethelred. Okay, so take a few minutes to complete this. You need to complete this. Don't just copy it with the 3 points, as many of you often do when sending me homework. Don't copy it, complete it. So, you can pause now, and you can resume when you're finished. 5, 4. Moving on. Another problem was that the king had failed in its most important role, to protect the kingdom and its people. So, again, magic highlighter, we can say, we can avoid another problem because we know we're now listing the problems of Aethelred. We can say the king had failed to protect the kingdom. We know it was his most important role as a king. We don't need to say that again. So the king had failed to protect his kingdom and its people. Most of the English felt that they were not being properly protected, and most of them gave in and gave the Vikings whatever they wanted. When Danish King Svein Forkbeard launched a full-scale invasion in 1013, he faced little resistance. So what do we say? We say the king had failed to protect the kingdom, most of the English people gave in and gave the Vikings whatever they wanted. When the Danish launched their invasion, they faced little resistance. Okay, so this would be the sort of structure of our summary, the 3 main points. The king had failed. What was the reaction of the English? They just gave in and accepted the Vikings. What was the consequence on the Vikings? They had no resistance. So, you can say the king had failed to do what? Failed to protect the kingdom. When the Danish invaded, most English gave in. For example, this meant that Svein met very little what? Very little resistance. As always, take a few minutes to complete this and try to understand it, okay? Now, for the next one, I am only okay. Pause and complete this. And you can resume. Now, for the next slide, what I'm doing is I am only going to highlight the text. I'm not giving you the structure anymore. First I did it, then we did it together, now you are doing it by yourself. But I think you should be good enough to do independent work by now. So, let's read it. Aethelred fled into exile in Normandy. He tried to return and fight Svein from 1014 to 1016. And we but when he and Svein both died in 1016, the war ended. Svein's son Knut became king and he ruled until his death in 1042. So this is a very narrative paragraph, so you can just write the sequence of events. Aethelred fled, he returned to fight Svein, both died in 1016, Svein's son Knut became king. That is a good enough summary. So, pause now. And here we are again. Moving on to the next one, which is the last one, don't be afraid. And now we're trying to answer the day's question. Why is King Aethelred known as the Unready? Because of his mistakes... Because of his mistakes and because he left the throne to Knut, heir of Svein Forkbeard, Aethelred has gone down in history as the Unready. Now, unready in modern English means unprepared. However, it is actually a pun in Old English, and I am highlighting Old English because to understand this pun we need to understand the old language. Now, the name Aethelred means the well-advised. Ethel, which was a very standard prefix for most Anglo-Saxon royal name, means good, royal, this sort of things. Aethelred means the well-advised. However, Unread means the ill-advised, the poorly advised. This was a reference to his mistakes and his bad plans, which were caused by people who gave him bad advice. Remember what we wrote at the beginning of the lesson about the Earl that were giving the wrong advice to to Aethelred. They are the source of this, rather than an indictment of the fact that he was not ready. So, Aethelred the Unready is not Aethelred the Unprepared. It's Aethelred the Ill-advised. Ill-advised because he committed several mistakes, such as killing the Danes, such as trusting the wrong people, dismantling the fleet, and so on. So, summarize this. We can say, for example, Aethelred has gone down in history as the Unready because of his mistakes. The word unread in Old English means ill-advised. Pause the video and complete the summary of this paragraph before we move on to the next. Moving on. Now, I would like you to look at what you have written, read it again, understand what you have summarized, okay? Understand the summary that you wrote about the life of Aethelred, and try to answer this question. Why was King Aethelred known as the Unready? So, in Old English, the nickname of King Aethelred means the poorly advised. This is a reference to, for example, you can write, this is a reference to his many mistakes. Now, before he died, in 1016, he lost his kingdom to Svein Forkbeard, king of the Danes and the Norwegian. His greatest mistake was to what? You have plenty of choice. It's up to you to decide. Personally, I believe that his greatest mistake was the massacre of the Danes. I would also like you to explain why you believe this was his greatest mistake. For example, I believe that by killing all the Danes, Aethelred gave the Vikings an excuse to invade, and also he alienated is a fancy word to say that he made enemy of, he fell out with many of his earls. So, under him, England was not unified but divided. This meant that the population would do what? They would welcome the Vikings where they invaded. Okay, so this was the day's lesson. I hope you learned something. I would really like to see your work, so finish answering this question, write it in your books or in your file or wherever, and send it to me, and I will see you next time. Bye everyone.